Dusk lingers over the edge of a forgotten western outpost, stretching long shadows across the grass as the last light fades. The sky hovers between purple and blue, bruised and heavy, as if it too mourns what has been lost. Down by the riverbank, a woman kneels. Her dress is soaked to the knees, her hands red and raw, moving with a careful rhythm over a small worn shirt, once her child's, now emptied by the current. The river does not rush tonight. It seems to pause as if holding its breath with her. She does not cry. Not anymore. Grief has stripped her even of that release. The river has wept all her tears for her, again and again, with every nightfall that brings no return. Behind her, facing the creek, an empty wooden chair waits in silence. No one sits there, not for days. A woolen blanket remains folded neatly over one arm, untouched, preserving the warmth that vanished. Every thread in that blanket remembers the small feet, the laughter, the nights when nothing was missing except, maybe, peace. Now, the only sound is the hush of water against rocks and the call of a lone night bird. In the quiet of the town, people whisper her name. Their voices do not reach her, but their eyes linger when she passes. They turn away quickly, as if afraid the silence that clings to her might take root in their own lives. She walks with her shoulders drawn, her shawl pulled tight, carrying a weight that no one else can carry for her. In this place, pain is rarely named, only witnessed at a distance. A breeze lifts, cool and steady, as the first sign of something different appears. High on a grassy ridge, a boy stands watching her. He is still, so still he might be a shadow carved from the land itself, eyes wide and unblinking in the dusk. He does not call out, does not wave. His presence is a question, his silence a mirror. This is how new chapters begin in the West, with someone watching, someone waiting, and the quiet between them stretching deep as the river itself. He didn't arrive with footsteps, nor with questions or pleas. He simply appeared, one evening, at the edge of her porch, where the dirt softened with the coming dew. There was no knock on the door, no voice in the wind, just a single boot print pressed into the mud. That was the only proof he had chosen her home over all the others scattered across the empty plain. For a long moment, he stood beneath the shadow of her roof, hands at his sides, eyes lowered, the hush of his presence, as steady as breath, held at the edge of a dream. Inside, she moved quietly, placing a plate on the table, her fingers trembling just enough to betray that she noticed him. The first night, he did not touch the food. He only looked at it, gaze flickering from the bread to her hands and back again, as if weighing whether to trust the warmth or to wait for it to turn cold. On the second night, he reached for a piece of crust, the smallest movement, slow and uncertain, breaking the silence not with words but with the sound of bread yielding to hungry fingers. She spoke little, careful not to fill the air with noise that might drive him away. He offered nothing in return, but in the heavy quiet, something passed between them, something that did not require explanation. It was the sharing of space, the ritual of eating side by side, two souls learning to breathe in the same rhythm, even if neither one dared look the other fully in the eye. Later, as dusk deepened to full dark, she noticed a pair of boots left outside the door to his small room. They were not new, the leather cracked, but they were smaller than hers, dusted with the long walk that had brought him here. He had placed them beside her boots, not behind, not apart, but as if to say, without saying, that he intended to stay. In this house, the quiet was never empty. It was the beginning of something neither one had words for, not yet, but something that could be built, gesture by gesture, in the long hush of western nights. She never went back to the river after that day. The path that once called her every morning grew wild with thistles and grass, as if the land itself wished to cover her loss, to shield her from the memory of what the water had carried away. The river's voice still crept through the night, curling around the windows, a memory that refused to quiet, but she let the distance grow. It was the boy now who wandered near the banks, never far, barefoot and careful, his steps pressing shallow marks in the silt. He moved like someone searching for an answer. He did not have the words to shape, pausing at the water's edge as if to listen for what could not be said. At night, he woke from dreams he could not tell. There were no screams, only the sharp gasp of someone who remembers too well what drowning feels like, the struggle for air, the weight of silence pressing down. Sometimes she found his bedsheets tangled and damp, his face turned to the wall, his small hands clutching nothing. She did not ask what chased him through sleep. She knew enough of loss to recognize it in another. One evening, as the light faded, she folded a towel, thick and soft, and left it by his door. No words, no explanation, just the offering of dry cotton, a promise that whatever haunted him would find comfort waiting. That night, for the first time since he arrived, the house, lay in peace. He slept through till dawn, breath slow and deep, and she sat beside her window watching the land begin again, grateful for a silence that finally felt like rest, not absence. There are days when the land holds its breath, when the air shivers with warning. That summer, a prairie fire crept slow and hungry toward the edge of town, sending men running with buckets, shouting, stamping, praying. She did not join them. She packed nothing. She simply sat on the porch, hands folded, eyes steady on the line where smoke bled into sky. She was not careless, only tired. Sometimes, when you have lost everything once, the world's threats lose their teeth. The boy did not run either, not at first. But as the flames drew close, licking the outskirts of fields, he stood before her, small and shaking, and reached for her hand. It was the first time, his grip, sudden and urgent, silent but fierce. In that moment, no words passed between them, but everything inside both their bodies screamed the same thing: run. Together they slipped out the back and crossed the empty square, the town's panic rising behind them, until they found the old church and the cellar beneath its floor. They crouched in the dark, listening to the world roar above, holding breath and fear. Her mind wandered, unbidden, to her child, ashes on cheeks, eyes wide and unafraid, a memory that cut sharp in the blackness. When the danger passed and the fire burned itself into embers, they climbed the cellar stairs. On the porch, as dusk settled and the sky turned forgiving again, he sat beside her. He took her hand, this time softly, and did not let go. For the first time since the river, she allowed it. She did not pull away. Their silence at last was shared. In the settling dust and waning heat, they found something fragile and unnamed, a place where fear could finally rest, if only for a while. One afternoon, as the heat simmered and the dust hung in golden streaks beneath a relentless sun, a stranger rode slowly into town. His horse moved with lazy steps, as though even it distrusted the man it carried. He wore clothes too clean for these parts, his hat shadowing eyes that never quite settled, always darting, hiding something that couldn't be named. He knocked at her door like he already owned what was behind it, a smile ready, papers clutched in hands that trembled too slightly to be honest. The boy did not speak. He never did, but something changed in his posture. Shoulders pulled inward, eyes suddenly clouded with an old panic she had never seen. He backed away slowly, breath tight in his chest, his body screaming a memory of harm. She saw it plainly, the unspoken truth of scars buried deep, beyond words, in silence, heavier than stone. She invited the stranger in without smiling, poured coffee that was black and bitter, setting it quietly on the table. Beside the cup, she placed a rusted rifle, unloaded, harmless, yet clear in its meaning. The truth of it sat heavy between them, solid and unquestionable. No threats were made, no accusations spoken. Her silence said enough. By sundown, the stranger was gone, leaving only the faint echo of hooves disappearing toward the horizon. But he left something behind, forgotten or discarded. A photograph, edges worn from being carried too long. In the image, the boy stood stiffly beside a man whose face was scratched out, erased deliberately, violently, as if someone had tried to remove the memory itself. She stared at it, feeling the weight of unspoken stories and secrets hidden in plain sight. Quietly, she slipped the photo into her pocket, looked toward the boy who stood cautiously in the doorway, and said nothing. But her eyes held a promise. He would never be taken from this place, from the silent protection she offered, from a home that asked nothing more of him than to be safe. Names have power, spoken or silent, carried openly or kept locked away, and she never asked for his. He never offered it. Between them stood the quiet understanding that some wounds remain closed only by never speaking what caused them. Yet there are times when silence speaks louder, when the spaces between words hold truths heavier than the air they breathe. She knew this. He felt it too. One morning she rose early, stepping out to greet a sun softened by mist. In the stable, something caught her eye. A new carving in the worn wooden wall, etched deeply enough that splinters of pine curled delicately around each letter. It was a name, unmistakably clear, carefully shaped by hands too small to bear such heavy meaning. But it wasn't his name. It was the name of her son, the name she whispered only in dreams, the one memory she carried closest to her chest, silent and aching. Her hand hovered near the carving, fingers trembling slightly, feeling the letters as if they burned with questions she dared not ask. She turned away slowly, carrying with her the heaviness of a child's attempt to speak love and understanding without words, to acknowledge loss without opening old wounds. That night, beneath the steady glow of a single lantern, she took out an old quilt, half-stitched, unfinished, forgotten, since the river took her child. She ran her fingers over the fabric, tracing faded patterns, as if reconnecting with a part of herself she had abandoned. Slowly, quietly, she began sewing again. Each stitch carried meaning: forgiveness, acceptance, healing, not forgetting. She understood now more than ever that some memories must live on, held softly in the hands, acknowledged with tenderness, honored in silence. In the quiet darkness, as her needle moved steadily, she felt the boy's presence lingering at the door. He did not enter, only watched. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Their silence had already said enough. It began quietly, as it always does, whispers slipping from mouth to mouth like wind through tall grass. Children spoke first, their small voices soft but sure, saying the mute boy cursed the wind, that he drew darkness wherever he walked. Their parents joined soon after, words careful at first, hidden in glances and sidelong looks. Then, grown men crossed the street when she approached, hats pulled low to avoid her eyes. Their steps quickened as if something might follow if they lingered too close. One Sunday morning at the market, among baskets filled with apples and bread warm from ovens, the preacher stepped toward her, his eyes kind but cautious, his voice low as though speaking truth gently could make it hurt less. "Grief can twist the soul," he warned softly, as if offering comfort, as if he understood the ache she carried. She looked at him without anger, without bitterness. She saw only a man who did not fully grasp the weight of loss, one who meant well but did not yet know how deeply silence can heal rather than harm. She did not argue, nor defend. She simply bought honey and beans, placed each carefully in her basket, and left the market quietly. Before dawn the next day, when the town still slept and shadows stretched long across the dusty streets, she left a jar of honey at the preacher's gate. No note, no explanation, just a gentle gift, a quiet truth. Some wounds don't need healing, just dignity. Walking home through the thin morning fog, her shawl drawn tight against the cool air, she breathed deeply. She knew who she was. She knew the boy who lived beneath her roof. She did not need to correct what others misunderstood. Sometimes strength lies not in speaking louder, but in remaining steady, gentle and certain, no matter what whispers lingered on the breeze. They stood side by side beneath the pale autumn sky, the air crisp, wood stacked neatly at their feet. She watched as he swung the axe, movements careful, steady, but suddenly he missed, the blade glancing off the log, leaving the wood unbroken. She said nothing, offered no correction, just stood quietly, waiting for him to find his rhythm again. Sometimes mistakes hold their own wisdom, their own quiet lessons. He stopped, breathing shallowly, his small shoulders rising and falling with effort. Then slowly, as though drawing courage from somewhere deep and untouched by grief, he turned toward her, eyes wide and uncertain. His lips parted briefly, and from them came the faintest sound, so quiet, so tentative, she wondered later if she'd imagined it, a single word. Ma. The syllable hung briefly in the air between them, delicate and fragile as the last leaf clinging stubbornly to a tree. She did not respond, did not rush to embrace or overwhelm him. She simply handed the axe back, her hands trembling slightly, betraying what her voice refused to say. Their eyes met, and in that moment was an understanding deeper than language could carry, a recognition that some bonds are shaped not by blood or birth, but by shared silence, shared wounds and shared healing. Later, as twilight painted the room with shadows, she entered her bedroom and paused, her breath catching gently in her throat. There on the pillow, carefully carved from wood, sat two horses, one large, one smaller. No note, no explanation, just the quiet symbolism of something precious, something unspoken, but deeply understood. She picked them up carefully, holding them in her palm, feeling the rough edges smoothed by patient fingers, knowing they spoke of connection, of belonging. That night, as she slept, she dreamed not of loss, but of open fields, gentle winds, and horses running freely beneath a wide, forgiving sky. Winter arrived softly, wrapping the land in silence that felt deeper now, no longer an emptiness, but a presence, comforting and steady. The world slowed, covered in a gentle layer of snow, each flake settling gently, quietly, like an unspoken promise kept. The rocking chair that faced the creek, long untouched and forgotten, finally creaked again, not from ghosts or memories, but from the quiet rhythm of life returning, steady as the heartbeat she'd begun to feel again. Each evening now, before dusk fully settled, he moved through the house carefully, lighting lanterns, chasing shadows from corners. She watched him from the window, not from worry or fear, but with the quiet gratitude of someone who had learned to see in the darkness, to trust the spaces between breaths, to accept that healing came quietly, without drama, without announcement. It came in the small moments, the careful gestures, the shared silence that held more meaning than 1,000 spoken words. No one ever called them mother and son, and neither asked for it. The townsfolk gradually stopped whispering, stopped crossing streets. Their quiet companionship became a simple truth, accepted by others as naturally as the sunrise or the seasons turning. Words mattered less now. It was the quiet they shared that had truly healed them, a silence built of respect and gentle patience, of acceptance that went beyond naming, beyond explaining. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through bare branches, casting patterns of lace across the porch, something caught her eye beneath the steps. She knelt slowly, reaching under the weathered wood, her fingers brushing against a small, carefully placed piece of driftwood. Carved discreetly into its grain were 2 sets of initials, hers and another's, side by side, quiet and permanent. She did not need to ask who had placed them there. She knew, she understood. Holding the driftwood gently, she looked out toward the river that had once taken so much from her, then back toward the house where quiet had finally come to stay. She smiled softly, feeling peace settle within her chest, full and certain. Some losses never fade, but some spaces once hollowed out by grief can fill again, quietly, patiently, until what remains is a calm, enduring truth that love finds its own way home, even without words, even in silence.